On May 7, 1915, a German U-boat sank the Lusitania, a British passenger liner headed to England from New York. It wasn't a totally unforeseen tragedy. Britain and Germany were at war, and Britain had been shipping military supplies from the US on passenger and merchant vessels. Because of this, Germany decided that any Allied ship near British waters was fair game for a torpedo attack. Before the Lusitania left for England, the German embassy even took out newspaper ads saying, "Travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies, and that travelers sailing in the war zone on ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk." But neither the printed warning nor the fact that the Lusitania actually had been carrying weapons was enough to prevent widespread outrage when almost 1,200 innocent passengers died. More than 120 of the victims were American. So, President Woodrow Wilson said, "That's it, grab your guns, guys," and the US military swooped into Europe, eager to do some avenging. I mean, Captain America was there, it was a whole thing. Hi, I'm Justin Dodd, and if you're starting to think this story smells a little fishy, you got a great nose for BS. For one, Captain America fought in World War II, not World War I. Also, he's not a real person. But more importantly, the US did not enter the war right away. Congress declared war against Germany in April 1917, almost 2 entire years after the Lusitania sank. The idea that the disaster directly caused the US to enter the fray is one of several persistent misconceptions about World War I that I'm talking about today, from Matahari's misdeeds to the Red Baron's reputation. Let's get started. The US entered World War I when Germany sank the Lusitania. The sinking of the Lusitania definitely helped turn the American public against Germany, and some people started to think that maybe staying out of the war was the wrong decision. This sentiment was bolstered by influential politicians like Theodore Roosevelt, who had been against neutrality from the get-go. After the Lusitania disaster, he issued a statement calling for retaliation. "It seems inconceivable that we can refrain from taking action in this matter, for we owe it not only to humanity, but to our own national self-respect." But at the time, Woodrow Wilson, whom Roosevelt later called the lily-livered skunk in the White House, was still committed to turning the other cheek. In 1916, he even convinced Germany to promise not to target merchant and passenger ships. Only when they reneged on that promise in early 1917 did Wilson finally start to seriously consider abandoning his commitment to neutrality. Another important factor was the Zimmermann telegram. Also taking place in early 1917, Germany's foreign minister Arthur Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexico, basically saying that if Mexico fought for Germany, Germany would ensure the return of some territory that the US had taken from Mexico. Unfortunately for Germany, Britain intercepted the telegram and said, "Hey, Woodrow Wilson, get a load of this." But, with a British accent or something. The Zimmermann telegram was widely reported in the US, and people began to feel like Germany was indirectly threatening invasion. This anxiety, combined with the fact that German submarines would clearly torpedo anything that crossed their paths, prompted Wilson to finally ask Congress for a declaration of war. World War I only involved Europe and the US. If your knowledge of World War I is mostly gleaned from grade school textbooks and blockbuster movies, you probably have a pretty Eurocentric impression of the whole ordeal. German U-boats, Russian Revolution, trenches tearing up the French countryside, etc. That stuff isn't wrong, but to only focus on Europe is to downplay just how devastating the war was on other continents. Now, the reason other continents got involved in the first place was largely due to European colonialism. A number of European countries, including Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, and Portugal, had taken control over huge swaths of Africa and Asia. When war broke out, they drafted native residents and fought on that land. It's estimated that about 2 million Africans took part in the war, and they weren't all soldiers. Porters, or carriers, were tasked with transporting food and other supplies to the troops. Journeys could last hundreds of miles, and thousands of porters perished along the way. Historian Melvin E. Page estimates that at least 200,000 Africans died in World War I campaigns. European forces relied on Africans for food too, both by officially requisitioning crops and simply stealing whatever they came across. Kalaki Mwakabinga, a young boy growing up in what is now Tanzania during the war, later recalled witnessing German soldiers retreat through his town. They came and looked for things. They would enter a house. If they found milk, they would just take it. If they saw chickens, they just took them. Present-day Tanzania was also the site of one of the most memorable East African battles, which took place in the port city of Tanga in early November 1914. It's nicknamed the Battle of the Bees, and not because Britain's Indian Expeditionary Force B was there, though it was. Britain had brought over Indian troops intending to seize the city from German forces. But Britain's men were undertrained and Germany's were unexpectedly well prepared, so Germany quickly took the upper hand. At one point, the clash caused swarms of bees to emerge from the surrounding trees and descend en masse upon the soldiers. The bees obviously didn't care whose side their victims were on, but because Britain ended up retreating for good after that, a theory circulated that Germany's soldiers had planted tripwires to disturb the bees on purpose. Where's the Hollywood blockbuster about this, huh? I mean, who among us hasn't been clamoring to see Jerry Seinfeld in an animated historical drama? Allied soldiers hated the Red Baron. By early 1917, German pilot Manfred Albrecht von Richthofen was well on his way to becoming the biggest baddie of the skies. He'd single-handedly shot down 16 Allied planes and had just been put in charge of his own squadron, Jasta 11. To commemorate the occasion, von Richthofen painted his biplane bright red, prompting allies to nickname him the Red Baron. Jasta 11's aviators were extremely lethal, and none more so than their commander. The Red Baron blasted down a total of 80 aircraft, a World War I record, and his homeland worshipped him. The man got bags upon bags of fan mail. You'd think the Allied soldiers would hate the Baron just as much as Germans loved him, but while they definitely didn't want to meet him in the open air, most also regarded him with respect, if not reverence. After a crash landing on January 24, 1917, the Red Baron got to chat with two English aviators he'd just shot down. He later wrote about the interaction in his autobiography, The Red Fighter Pilot. The two Englishmen greeted me like sportsmen. Consequently, it gave me particular pleasure to talk to them. I asked them whether they had previously seen my machine in the air, and one of them replied, "Oh yes, I know your machine very well. We call it Le Petit Rouge." The Red Baron's killing career came to a sudden end on April 21, 1918, when he was 25 years old. Allied forces shot him in the chest while he was flying above Vaux-sur-Somme, France. He crashed his plane and died almost immediately. His enemies didn't exactly sing "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead." Instead, they held a military funeral that British newspapers described as impressive and buried the Baron in a cemetery near Amiens, France. A wreath lay above his grave with the inscription, "To our gallant and worthy foe." When British aviation publication Aeroplane reported the Red Baron's death a few days later, it read, "There is not one in the Corps who would not gladly have killed him, but there is not one who would not equally gladly have shaken hands with him had he been brought down without being killed, or who would not so have shaken hands if brought down by him." As for what the Red Baron is doing plastered on the front of your frozen pizza box, a Schwann's company spokesperson told the Wall Street Journal in 2015 that they chose him as a mascot because he was a well-known fighter pilot and because he embodied strength and romance. You know, the two most important ingredients in pizza. Matahari was a prolific spy for Germany. On October 15, 1917, Matahari stood before a French firing squad in a Parisian suburb awaiting execution. French police Dr. Léon Bizarre recalled her composure in his 1925 memoir, translated from French. While an officer read the sentence, the dancer, who refused to be blindfolded, placed herself against the post and a rope, not even tied, was slipped around her waist. She then smiled at the nun who had looked after her in prison and even reportedly blew a kiss at the soldiers, though that last part may be apocryphal. Moments later, Matahari was dead. The court had deemed this a fair punishment for passing state secrets to Germany, causing the deaths of some 50,000 French soldiers, or so prosecutors claimed. But most historians agree that Matahari's crimes were anywhere from greatly exaggerated to literally non-existent. Don't get me wrong, Matahari wasn't exactly a beacon of trustworthiness. In fact, her entire identity was based on falsehood. As we discussed in a previous video, Matahari was born in the Netherlands as Margaretha Gertrude Zella. The persona she adopted as an exotic dancer was informed by her time living in what is now Indonesia, not on her upbringing. By the time World War I rolled around, Matahari was a bona fide celebrity across Europe. On stage, she entertained audiences with pseudo-religious stripteases. Her charisma served her well off stage too, and she never suffered a shortage of lovers. Her many connections made her an appealing candidate for espionage, and she accepted an offer, along with 20,000 francs, to spy for Germany in 1915. The following year, she accepted an offer to spy for France from French officer Georges Ledoux. How much spying she actually did, however, is unclear. There's no hard evidence that any intel she passed to either side was very useful. According to French files declassified in the 1980s, she only ever told the Germans petty gossip and details from newspapers. As Pat Shipman wrote in her Matahari biography Femme Fatale, she was recognized everywhere, known everywhere, and was inevitably the center of attention. If indeed she was a spy, Matahari surely ranks among the world's most inept agents. She sent uncoded letters to Ledoux through the ordinary mail, she telegraphed him openly, she called at his office repeatedly. Inept or not, Matahari began to seem like a liability. In late 1916, French officers intercepted telegrams mentioning Matahari's German codename H21. They'd been transmitted by a German lover of hers, Arnold Kahl, and some scholars believed he'd sent them knowing that the French would see the messages and then arrest her. In February 1917, that's exactly what they did. But without proof that Matahari had actually committed treason, why were French officials so keen on killing her? Some argue that they may have been using her case as a way to restore faith in the war effort and boost morale. As French historian Frédéric Welton explained in an interview for France 24, 1917 was a terrible year. The government had to show that despite German offensives, the Russian Revolution, and mutinies on the field, France was going to hold out until victory. By executing this woman, the government showed that it was willing to do whatever it took. World War I ended at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918. At the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, World War I stopped being a thing. That's why November 11th is known as Armistice Day. Well, technically the US changed the name to Veterans Day in 1954 so Americans could honor all military veterans, not just those from the Great War, and other countries call it Remembrance Day for the same reason. Though, for most countries, the official end of World War I came when the Treaty of Versailles was signed in June 1919, Armistice Day is commonly cited as the end of the actual fighting. But not everybody laid down their weapons on that day. Some countries had already stopped fighting before November 11th, and some combatants remained engaged after it. This was partially because not everyone was just a phone call away. The troops of German Major General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, for example, were still dispersed around East Africa. On November 10th, the British General Staff telegrammed a base in East Africa asking, in case there's an armistice, what would be the quickest way of sending a message to von Lettow? Germany agreed to an armistice the next morning at about 5 a.m. to come into effect around 6 hours later. That didn't leave enough time to alert von Lettow before the ceasefire went into effect. He reportedly didn't hear about it until November 14th, and his forces had continued to fight in the interim. Von Lettow didn't formally surrender until November 25th in what's now Zambia. Allied forces, including an American outfit known as the Polar Bear Expedition, continued to fight in Russia too. Russia had quit World War I back in March 1918 under pressure from the Bolsheviks, and a civil war ensued. But the Allies still really needed the nation's military, so they sent troops there on what was basically a side quest. Help defeat the Bolsheviks, and then Russia will be able to re-enter the war. Since that motive became moot on Armistice Day, it seems like the Polar Bear Expedition and its cohorts should have thrown in the towel when 11 a.m. rolled around. But that didn't happen. They kept participating in Russia's civil war well into 1919. As historian James Carl Nelson told Smithsonian, the biggest complaint you heard from the soldiers was, no one can tell us why we're here, especially after the armistice. And if you're watching in the United States, it might surprise you to learn that we were technically at war with the Central Powers until 1921. Remember the Treaty of Versailles? The Senate wasn't particularly keen on it, so they didn't ratify it. In April 1921, President Harding noted, nearly 2.5 years ago the World War came to an end, and yet we find ourselves today in the technical state of war. By July of 21, both the Senate and the House had voted on ending the war officially and sent the Knox-Porter resolution to Harding for his signature. This led him to give one of the most stirring speeches in American history. That's all. If you have a topic for a future episode of Misconceptions, let us know about it in the comments below. I'll be more likely to read it if you also include a nice compliment about me because I'm vain. Thanks for watching.